Good evening. My name is Shahan Shafir, and today we are joined by Dr. Farhan Ahmed, an infectious disease specialist and critical care fellow at Creighton University in Nebraska, to present you with a webinar on the topic of the COVID-19 vaccination brought by the Infection Prevention and Control Foundation USA. Firstly, thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for being here with us today. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has flipped our world upside down, causing extreme economic and social disruption in the process. Today, we are gathered here to discuss a potential light at the end of the dark tunnel, the COVID-19 vaccination. However, before getting into the newly developed vaccines, let's track back to what some consider to be the natural vaccine, antibodies. How long do antibodies last after getting COVID-19? And why should people continue to follow regulations after contracting COVID-19 and developing immunity?
Thank you for inviting me and talking about this really important stuff. The vaccines have a long history. If you talk about the infectious diseases, it goes back to, I would say, centuries. At the time when initially TB was being worked up, and we came to the point where tetanus came into the picture. All these infections were deadly, devastating. And then we still know plague, pandemic. So those were the things that triggered the scientists to think about the stuff. Particularly the it is initially started as a trial. We really appreciate those people who were brave enough to use these things. I still remember the time when they started human experiments on chickenpox vaccine, and those were the brave people in the start. So it's a really long history, and we have came to the point where we are talking about developing a vaccine within a year. So it's great stuff. It's amazing stuff.
So let's start out with the golden question. Why should Americans seriously consider taking the COVID-19 vaccination?
Now that's a very important question. At the point when we are talking about winning against this pandemic, there are two ways of doing it. And the most commonly heard maneuver or the way to deal with it is herd immunity. When we talk about that, that means we are talking about infection in around like 70 to 80% of population. And that comes with a massive mortality. So that's not the way of taking over or winning against this pandemic. So way to deal with it is to immunize our population at a massive rate. And this would be, I would say, human history biggest challenge at this point, where we know how to tackle it. The biggest challenge is to reach out to the people who are at high risk to begin with. And then going from there, I think every country, every continent has its own set of challenges. But the aim should be to start with a high risk and at least vaccinate 60% of the population.
I agree. I think it's really important that Americans consider taking the vaccination because it not only helps you from not getting COVID-19, but it also is a safer way to help build protection, as you mentioned, as herd immunity is essentially very dangerous and will end up causing mass death, which in essence is terrible. And on the contrary, unfortunately, as you might know, there are people who cannot receive the vaccination, specifically those with immediate allergic reactions, including to, as stated by the CDC, polyethylene glycol and polysorbate. Could you provide more insight into these specific populations?
Dealing with these situations where someone had allergy to component of vaccine, we have to see, what exactly polyethylene glycol is. You know, it is being used in medicine for quite a while, so it's not a new thing for us. Primarily, it has been used in laxatives with a very good tolerance. So that's why when they did the trials, we see with both vaccines, whether it was Moderna or Pfizer, the severe allergic reactions were less than 1% and 0.5% respectively. So I think the tolerance is pretty good. Now, if we read the CDC guidelines, what they talk about, if someone has documented history of anaphylaxis to any of the vaccine components, that's the only absolute contraindication. Otherwise, if someone has anaphylaxis to like a bee sting or even anaphylaxis to any other vaccine, that is even not considered as an absolute contraindication. They said that be cautious, give the vaccine, and monitor it for at least 30 minutes. In our hospital network, as of today, even in Nebraska, I didn't hear about or see any of the report of anaphylaxis due to this vaccine.
Yeah, and as I was reading, it is exceptionally rare. However, I still, as you stated before, think that it's vital that before the people receive the vaccine, that they consult their doctors to make sure it's perfectly safe, considering any pre-existing conditions or susceptibility to allergy. And currently, there are two authorized vaccines in the United States: the Moderna and the Pfizer and biotech vaccine. How does the Moderna vaccine differ to the Pfizer biotech vaccine? And is there a better one out of the two?
So these two are both mRNA-based vaccines. The trials were run head-to-head. There are some minor differences. Now, if you read the CDC profile of these vaccines, you can see that they they have revealed the components of the vaccine, but they have not exactly revealed that what exact component of the mRNA is in the vaccine. Though we know that it just translates the spike protein, but what exactly it is. But the good thing is both of them have 95% and 94% efficacy. So that's one of the greatest efficacy so far. Before I go ahead and go into the details of difference, let's just recall the measles vaccine. Measles was a pandemic and now absolutely greatly taken care of. And that measles vaccine had an efficacy of 70% or so. Now we are talking about these vaccines were like 94, 95% effective. So we can compare where we stand. Now, as far as the differences, so both are 2 doses, but it's a bit of difference in timing of the second dose. When it comes to Pfizer, second dose is at day 21, Moderna at day 28. The side effect profile, Pfizer had like 1% of severe side effect in their trial. Moderna has almost similar sort. But the good thing is, with the Moderna, they released their recent report and they said that it is really active against all the variants. Pfizer still has to repeat that, reveal that press release, but the scientists who did the trial, they really believe. So there's not a lot of big difference. And the final thing which I really want to highlight is how these are stored. When we talk about the Pfizer, their storage temperature is like really low, minus 70 degree. For Moderna, it's minus 20. So that's a bit of a difference. And that plays a big role in logistics and distribution.
Yeah, so being a doctor like yourself, I believe you've likely been vaccinated against COVID-19. And could you just go through the experience and the process and maybe even specify the vaccine that you received?
So, we were offered Pfizer vaccine at our hospital centers, which are under the umbrella of CHI. Now, before taking the vaccine, being a doctor and reading through all these details, I actually read through the trials that what happened after the first dose of vaccine and what happened after the second dose. I knew that the first dose would be relatively easier. They may have just routine expected side effects, which included local side effects like injection site pain, bit of soreness, mild fatigue, mild headache. And the study population had relatively more side effects when they got the second dose. And I would rather use the term of reactogenicity. What is happening that common people like laymen use the term a reaction. What actually, when we use scientific term, particularly talking about immunology, the term which should be used is reactogenicity. What you feel that the day one when you get the vaccine right away, you don't, most of the cases, you don't feel any immediate side effects right away. It's just the next 6 to 48 hours, which are just the period, which may vary in people to people, but that's when you may experience a whole spectrum of uh, ranging from mild headache, local pain, fatigue, fever, headache, all that stuff. And that I use the term reactogenicity. That means that your body is responding to this and getting active and making all the immune response.
Yeah, so following up on your experiences, what can Americans and the general public expect at their appointments to get the vaccine? And is there anything Americans should know before taking the vaccine in regards to symptoms, for example, as you mentioned?
I will just simplify it and just caution them that the side effects are not that common, right? The severe side effect when I talk about. There are general symptoms that you may feel, and that includes the injection site pain, some soreness, mild fatigue. You may have some fever, which can get better by Tylenol, and mild headache. That's what it is expected. And once you get the vaccine, then that's a common practice. They inject you the vaccine and they let you sit there for like next 15 minutes and just monitor. So that's a safe thing. However, if you have any history of severe side effects that includes anaphylaxis to any other components in the past of some other vaccine, they will let you sit there for like 30 minutes. So it's a safer way to do it. It's not like you get the vaccine, get out of the building. You are being monitored. So I would rather recommend you that rather than relying on the internet data and the infodemics, uh, if you are really, really worried, you can even read their trials. They're open free for all the public.
Yeah, I think it's really important for Americans to realize that the vaccine is indeed safe after multiple clinical trials, for example. And in response to multiple conspiracy theories, I think that Americans, should indeed consult CDC, for example, sources with multiple lines of information on how safe the vaccine indeed is. And moving on to the process of administration, as we're seeing under a new president, Joe Biden. Joe Biden has an ambitious plan of vaccinating 100 million people in the first 100 days. How important will it be for vaccinated individuals to still follow the principles of social distancing for protection against COVID-19?
Well, that's a very important question. Now, going back to how the administrative changes in the White House will impact the vaccination distribution. Now, we had to see what is exactly happening in the background. So, the US vaccine distribution is being taken care of by three departments. That includes the CDC, Department of Defense, and Department of Health and Human Services. And the strategy they are following is Operation Warp Speed. So that was even established before this whole administration came into being. And one thing to highlight, the newer administration did not make any changes in these departments who are heading the vaccine distribution process. So I would say that even though they are pretty aggressive on the treatment and controlling the vaccine uh, distribution process, but the baseline skeleton still remains the same. And in order to just highlight how these things are happening, they are just following the same protocol which was set up by Operation Warp Speed. And that includes, in US, it is based on priority groups, group 1A, 1B, and 1C. The newer administration did not change their distribution pattern. However, they are discussing about if you open up more options in a group 1C. And I can simplify that. Group 1A is the highest priority group, and that was defined by the CDC, and that includes the healthcare provider. And in US, there are around like 21 million healthcare providers, and that also includes the residents of long-term care facilities, which may range up to 3 million. That's the first phase. The good thing is in most of the states we are already moving on from priority group 1A to 1B. Now 1B means that these are the category which includes people who are age greater than 75 year of age, and the frontline essential worker. Now, there's a bit of discussion that who is actually characterized or classified as a frontline essential worker, which may vary from state to state. But the bigger picture is that they will be under category 1B. And the next phase would be category 1C. I think we have not reached there yet. Well, that will be the people with the age 16 to 64 with high risk medical conditions. So that's how the US is approaching this situation.
So you mentioned when specific groups of people can expect to be vaccinated. When can the general American public, however, expect to receive a vaccination?
Now that's an important question, and that just based on this distribution category that I would say, we just talked about most of the states are entering a priority group 1B, and that includes the person age 75 year or older and essential health workers. Most of the states are entering in this phase, meaning that by now, people in various states who are age greater than 75 should be getting some sort of information from their health clinics. And I would say the VA, the veteran hospitals, are really on the top of this situation in the sense that they are already vaccinating their high risk population age greater than 75. So things are uh, running at a bit of a slower pace than expected, but they are going forward.
Yeah, so we've talked about the vaccine, its distribution, what the vaccine is in general, and when general Americans can expect to receive the vaccine. However, as you know, with every vaccine, there's a specific group of people who doubt its effectiveness and safety, and the vaccine's quick creation in the United States has indeed raised eyebrows, with some refusing to take it over concerns over its safety and quick creation. Is this a valid argument?
I was in a clinic today, and there were a couple of patients who had this concern that whenever they get a flu shot, they get sick. So they rather want to wait and see how the things go. Now, you can educate these people that the vaccines have been tested and they are reported to be safe so far. Population that was studied in all these studies. Now, getting back, I usually quote this uh, sample size. The Pfizer study had 43,000 uh, people in it, and Moderna had 30,000. And then I quote that, healthcare providers are the first line. So if this was some conspiracy, healthcare providers should be at the end of the list, but they are right up front. So we are providing ourselves uh, to face this thing if there is anything. But making it simple, I would say that uh, there will be a group of people who had some concerns. Talking through the educational points may help them to understand the situation. But if someone is refusing, that means that maybe either educational gap or there is a uh, reasonable story behind it. But one thing I want to highlight, and that also CDC mentioned, that if you have a COVID-19 infection within past 90 days, then you can cautiously wait because the reinfection rate is really low in first 90 days. So that is a group of people that I usually don't push them hard to definitely get a vaccine because uh, it's less likely. But I keep on stressing that, if you have concerns, and some of them have like a valid concern in a sense that, oh, we got uh, some sort of vaccine in the past and it had anaphylaxis. So we wanted to see more people getting it before we feel comfortable. And if they have like a COVID-19 infection within 90 days, it's okay to reschedule them and see what the things go.
Yeah, being a soccer player, in my soccer team, there are a variety of kids who follow some conspiracy theory, thinking that the vaccine either contains a tracker from the government or causes COVID-19 itself, both of which make absolutely no sense. As you mentioned, the vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of people in the United States have received these vaccines, and they have undergone the most intensive safety monitoring in the United States ever, arguably. And to combat many of these theories that indeed are quite flawed, how do you think we can stop the spread of these myths? And do you think more needs to be done by governments, for example, in order to do so?
Unfortunately, the thing that happened, that pandemic came right at the point where there was ongoing uh, political campaigns all over US, and unfortunately, mask became a symbol and vaccine became a symbol. But I think it's all about educating and spreading the right information. Wherever you see that someone is trying to spread an information which has no basis, I would rather engage them in an educational way with their evidence. These are the evidence. Now, I know there are certain studies in the past, and what happened that whenever I face some sort of these situations where someone really uh, come up with some weird theory, most of them, most of them quote that Lancet study about uh, autism related to vaccine. Now, that's one of the most unfortunate incident in human history as far as the academic go. That was a faulty study, a really bad medical study got published and now being quoted, even though the journal took that away. Now the laymen keep on quoting that. I think it is equally important at the time when we are trying our best to educate the population. It comes up with a lot bigger responsibility with all these medical journals to really screen the data which they are publishing.
Yeah, for sure. The the topic of misinformation is one that personally I believe is very dangerous. And I, as you mentioned, I completely agree. I think education is the number one priority. And IPAC USA is and has continued to provide education to these specific populations in order to make sure that they are well informed about these topics. And moving on to more of a global basis, the scientific community has consistently reminded us that the vaccines have to be both effective and safe before they are rolled out for public use. Nevertheless, governments globally, specifically China and Russia, have strived to roll out vaccines, which indeed is logical, as quickly as possible. In your opinion, how much of that process was followed before rolling these vaccines out to the public?
Now, if we go beyond US and talk about the global aspect, World Health Organization has been, leading all these efforts. And I would prefer to highlight this excellently great program which was initiated by uh, a trio of World Health Organization, the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, and Gavi. These are the three which are really on the front, and they came up with this COVAX, which is actually a COVID-19 vaccine global access program. This was really an excellent program which was initiated pretty early in the pandemic, and the whole idea was that there will be a point when the vaccine will be in the market and how to distribute it. And what it offers, this program, equitable distribution is the main goal when we talk about distribution of the vaccine across the globe. So World Health Organization, under the flagship of COVAX, had set up some basic goals. And what it's trying to do is trying to provide doses for at least 20% of every country's population. And then after doing that, the whole idea is to establish a way how to reach this 20% of high risk population. And apart from that, their main goal is to deliver the vaccines as soon as possible and to end this acute phase. And then the end target is to rebuild the economies, but that's pretty much far away. The first step would be to at least vaccinate 20% of the world, 20% of population of every country.
Yeah, and that perfectly leads into the final question of this webinar. Still, we face shortages of vaccines, as you've mentioned, in developed countries. whereas the developing nations don't have access to effective and safe vaccine candidates individually yet. And where do you see the standing of global health when the principles of equity are not being followed in the distribution of the vaccine?
Yeah, that's important, and that's a bit unfortunate, but I would again highlight the importance of this COVAX program by the World Health Organization. So, what they have done so far, this program has already secured more than 1 billion doses of vaccine. What they are doing, that they're actively monitoring various studies across the globe, trying to find the efficacy of various vaccines and provide them right away. So, they have already done that. Now, they have also received donation of about $2 billion from various international donors. One good thing that happened that previous U.S. administration was not releasing about $4 billion. Now that has happened, and U.S. has allocated about $4 billion to this COVAX program, and it still needs $5 billion more. So you can see how much uh, how much finance is involved when we talk about the global distribution.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the extent of vaccination, I would say, the initial goal is to at least vaccinate 20%, but there are certain challenges that we can see, and I will go through them one by one. One of them is when we talk about this 20% of each country, is to identify the group which are at high risk, and then how to reach out these 20% high risk people. Because when we, for example, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, it is the whole different monster. In US, we have electronic health system. People are enrolled. We know where they are located. Those countries, it's paperwork. You don't know where they are. It's just the national identification number. That's the only way you can track them. Now that's the number one goal: how to reach out those 20%. And then the vaccines that are being approved right now, their cold chain maintenance is such a big challenge. The kind of vaccine that we are talking about, mRNA, they are not practically and logistically possible in these far-flung areas when we talk about like Southeast Asia, we talk about Africa. So there are challenges, and COVAX is trying to cope up with all those things.
Yeah, from your you can definitely see that this COEX program has great potential, and I think that it's very important that we as a globe unite to provide vaccines to high risk populations in developing countries. And to end off, I'd like to thank you firstly for providing fantastic insight and being here. And I'd also like to say thank you for everybody watching and to continue to watch and support IPAC USA as we are planning on conducting future webinars just like this in the future, possibly even on the topic of the variant, which is going to be a very prominent issue perhaps in the next months. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.
Thank you, Arman. I really appreciate your efforts in this regard, and hopefully, with the spread of right information, is so important that people get the right information right up front, and they start getting vaccinated as soon as they have the facility of getting it. Thank you.
Thank you.